The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not represent the views of any Grand Lodge nor a pendant body of Freemasonry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Masonic Shelf podcast, a once-a-month journey through some of the best in Masonic books, writings, and general literature. My name is Chris Williams.
And my name is Brad Kohanke. And we have a guest reviewer today, and he has chosen a book entitled Western Esotericism, A Concise History by Antoine Faivre. It was translated from French by Christine Rohn, and it's a pretty interesting walk through the history of Western esotericism. I'll read a brief summary of the book, and then we'll introduce our guest reviewer. Today we're diving into Western Esotericism, A Concise History by Antoine Faivre, one of the most respected scholars in the field. In this book, Faivre helps us understand what esotericism really means, not as a collection of strange or secret beliefs, but as a key part of Western spiritual and intellectual history. He traces how mystical traditions, Hermeticism, alchemy, Kabbalah, and Theosophy have influenced philosophy, science, religion, and art over the centuries. It's a clear and thoughtful guide that brings structure and understanding to a subject that's often misunderstood or just dismissed as occult. With that, Chris, who's our guest reviewer?
I got to tell you, I'm real excited because our guest this month is someone you and I know very, very, very well. He's our good friend and brother Robert Park from our good old hometown of San Antonio. Welcome, Brother Park. We're sure glad to have you here today. Thanks for coming on.
I'm very happy to be here. This has been a long time coming. I'm finally glad we got to make the dates work. This is great.
Yeah, we were looking forward to this. We always enjoy talking to you. We knew you'd pick a hard book. We were kind of dreading that part of it.
This one's not too bad. This one's relatively short.
Well, it's relatively short, but it's certainly not an easy read by any stretch of the imagination.
We're hopeful that you're going to talk the whole hour, so we're in good shape.
Yeah, this is an academic pursuit here.
But again, that's one of the reasons I chose this book for this. I know this is some people wouldn't consider this a Masonic book, even though he does go into Freemasonry a bit in the book. But the reason I like this is because he was one of the first academics to try to define in an academic way what esoteric means. And again, like before 20 or 30 years ago, no one really treated this subject as an academic subject. It was kind of pushed into the background, and you wouldn't have a university actually having a chair of this type of studies. But now there's multiple chairs of esoteric studies, and Antoine was one of the first ones to really get that going. And his definition is still used by writers today. I mean, it's been critiqued, but he was the first one to try to do this overarching definition of what esoteric means. And the reason I wanted to get into it is because one of the talks that I like to give in Masonry is there was an article. Do you remember that article that De Hoyos wrote, I think like 3 or 4 years ago, that was, "Is Scottish Rite Masonry Esoteric?"
Yeah.
And it was a pretty good article, but it generated a lot of talk in our lodge. Is Blue Lodge Masonry esoteric? And people figured out pretty quick no one could really define what esoteric meant. And so going to this book and using his definitions and trying to apply that to Masonry generated a lot of interesting discussion. And again, that's one of the reasons I picked this, is to I wanted to go through that with y'all and go through his criteria and kind of see what y'all thought about how that applies to Freemasonry.
That's great. I mean, we've got questions, but you take the lead and we'll just chime in whenever we have a thought.
Okay. Well, again, I got a lot of notes here. I was trying to prepare for this. But he goes through first, different things. When people say the word esoteric, like how it's used, like what most people think that means, and he kind of comes up with a few different definitions. And just really briefly, I wanted to go through those because when I've talked about this in lodges, people are like, yeah, I kind of picked from this one and like over from this one, but I didn't consider this. But his first meaning was when you say the word esoteric, people tend to think that that could mean anything that is not quote unquote mainstream religious thought. And what he said was if you go to like a bookstore and look under, like they might have an esoteric section, you will find stuff in there from like everything, anything that has like a scent of mystery to it. You'll have Oriental wisdom traditions, you'll have yoga, you'll have Egyptology, ufology, astrology. There'll be all sorts of divination, parapsychology, all the different Kabbalahs, practical magic, tarot, New Age, new religious movements. All those are placed side by side. So like anything that doesn't meet like traditional or exoteric like religious studies are placed in esoteric stuff. And again, I think that's what a lot of people think. They jumble all of that together as what is esoteric. His second meaning, which kind of applies to some of Masonry, was that some people think esoteric means teaching or facts that are secret because they're deliberately hidden. And you get into that, what occult as a word means, like hidden. So in that one, like esoteric is just a synonym for initiatic. Like it's something that you have to be taught, like a teacher passes it on through one of those different traditions. And again, that's one way of looking at it. The third way he said to look at it is that there is a mystery inherent in things in of themselves, which is like nature is full of these occult signatures. There's relationships between the human and the universe and stars and metals. And again, under that definition, it's more of a Renaissance definition, like Renaissance, the Ficino, like nature magic. Then the fourth meaning, we've discussed this a lot, is the Gnostic meaning. That again, esoteric means that there is a way of knowing that, it looks to inner experience, like experiencing something directly, and that's the point. And we'll get back to that because I like that definition. And again, when we get into what he thinks esoteric, the attributes of it are, I think we can kind of collapse those after we read about it. But the fifth meaning, he has this quest for a primordial tradition. And again, in our CME class in Scottish Rite, we kind of went over that with Pike because that was a big thing for Pike, was that there is this, this one thing that kind of extends in a string throughout the ages, and we're all trying to figure out what that one thing is, like that original faith.
Perennialism, right?
Yes, perennialism. And again, it's the traditionalist school or perennialism. And so that was his fifth definition, but all of those things are kind of like overlapping. Like it's not just one thing. He says there's a sixth. When he updated the book, there was two publications of this. The second one, he said there was it refers to the history of the Western esoteric current. And I think what he's saying is basically it's the mystery religions of the West permeated by a Christian culture and visited by Jewish or Muslim religious traditions or even Far Eastern ones. But he would say that Jewish Kabbalah does not belong to the Western tradition, but Christian Kabbalah and Hermetic Kabbalah would. And so when you're talking about esoteric, it would be referring exclusively to the Western tradition. So he kind of limits it to that, which I don't know if I like that or not, but that was one of his definitions.
Well, if he's writing about the history of Western esotericism, it would be natural to exclude Jewish Kabbalah, Hinduism, Far Eastern religions.
Agreed, but then he's trying to give a definition to the word esoteric itself.
Yeah.
If he was going to say we're limiting this definition to the Western tradition, it would make a bit more sense. But when you're saying what does esoteric itself mean, and you limit it to that, there's some problems with that that I'll discuss later. But again, those were his definitions of what most people would think of when they think of esoteric. And then he gets into the fundamental characteristics of what something has to be esoteric. And if you want to go through those, I kind of want to discuss these as we go through them and see what you think of these. The first one is there is a sense of correspondences. And this is the as above, so below issue. Basically, that everything mirrors everything else. The macrocosm reflects the microcosm. The visible reflects the invisible. Symbols reflect being. Again, that there are relationships between the heavens and the human body, between the planets and the parts of the human body, between revealed texts and what nature shows us, and between those texts and the history of humanity. And he pulls that from a lot of different things. He pulls that, of course, from Hermeticism and the Corpus Hermeticum. I mean, as above, so below. From the Emerald Tablet, that's a huge part of Hermeticism. And then if you get into the corpus itself, you have the cosmos, which is mind-like, nature is symbolic. Humans are microcosmic mirrors of the divine. So he's taken from that. He's taken, of course, from Neoplatonism. Everything participates in the higher versus via likeness. You can rise up through those spheres. Christian Kabbalah and Jewish Kabbalah. And again, Renaissance magical philosophy. We've talked about Ficino and Pico and Agrippa, but they kind of pulled all that together and kind of Christianized it. But again, you have the planets corresponding to metals, metals corresponding to the organs, organs corresponding to virtues, angelic spheres correspond to divine name. All of that stuff comes from that. And he brings in alchemy a bit too. So I get where he's coming with this, and this gets into, I don't want to get into this too soon, but this gets into some of my problems with when he starts defining what esoteric is. He's basically looking at expressions of esotericism, like in the Western tradition. So he's looking at these things like you're looking at a dog, like he's looking at a golden retriever and saying a dog is a 60-pound yellow animal with a bushy tail, like et cetera, et cetera. He's describing what he sees, but again, I don't know if he's getting to the essence of what esoteric actually is. And I'm probably talking about that too soon, but I wanted to point that out because what he's doing is basically describing different currents in the esoteric tradition and what they may or may not have in common. But as far as that first one, again, you see that most of all of the esoteric currents we talk about share that aspect of correspondences, that there is a link between different things, whether or not just human in the universe, but different planes of existence, different items within the universe, and they're sympathetic to each other. And again, I want your opinion on that, but I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
I mean, obviously, he's pulling from the Emerald Tablet, the Corpus Hermeticum, but he's kind of viewing it through the lens of the Hermetic revival after the Renaissance. I mean, he does go back in the first couple of chapters and talk about the Corpus Hermeticum and the origins of it, but not to any great extent. He doesn't seem to really talk about it until we get to the chapters covering the Renaissance period.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with he is very fixated on that too. Like a lot of his stuff starts there and goes like after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's laying foundational work, but he's not. I mean, that was what made this book difficult for me is the vast majority of each chapter seems to be just a list of authors and their works. And you really have to look closely to pick out what his ideas are. And those really don't start until the Renaissance. And even then he's listing out like just author after author after author, playwright, artist, writer, as examples of the point he's trying to make without actually making the point himself. It's almost like I got to go back and read some of these guys that he's listing. You know what I mean?
I mean, that's one of the reasons I like this book because it's kind of a crash course. If anyone wants to like research the Western esoteric tradition and how it evolved, he does give a pretty good bibliography on that. Like if you want to go in there and look at those people and follow it, this is a good place to go to get kind of a roadmap for that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, again, tracing it from Greece, like through the Hellenistic period, and then through the Middle Ages and the addition of Islamic alchemy, and then the Jewish Kabbalah at that time, and then up through like the Hermetic revival, and even to like through Masonry to the Golden Dawn and today. It gives you a pretty good map to do all that.
Yeah.
And again, and I have to give the guy some credit because he's trying to put together a synthesis of what these all share that no one had ever really done before, taken seriously. But again, sometimes I just feel like he's looking at surface level things and not really getting to the root of what all these things share. But again, I don't want to jump the gun on that. I kind of want to get through all these different characteristics. Yeah, that's the first one. I think most people, there is there's an emphasis on correspondences in a lot of it, and that's what makes these work. You can't, practical magic wouldn't quote unquote work unless there was some kind of connection between things. But the second one is the idea of living nature. Again, that the cosmos is not only a series of correspondences, but it's alive. It's permeated with invisible and active forces connected with humanity, and that nature has a consciousness, so to speak. And again, that he's drawn from some of the same sources here. I mean, the Corpus Hermeticum literally says the cosmos is alive, like it's literally alive. The universe is an organism. Stars and planets have intelligences. Natural objects carry these divine signatures. Nature is a living God. You know, Neoplatonism from Plotinus to Iamblichus and Proclus, um, again, they said the same thing. Matter is not dead. It's a lower intensity form of life. Like everything has these intelligences between them. And Jewish Kabbalah, this came up big in Renaissance natural magic because living nature became a full worldview there. Ficino said that the world soul animates everything. Planetary spirits shape human temperament, metals and plants. And the magician works with living natural forces, not inert matter. So you're tapping into these intelligences. Um, Again, the living nature it's a combined inheritance. He takes Hermetic animism, Neoplatonic cosmology, Kabbalistic emanation, Renaissance natural magic. So he's summarizing all of this stuff. But again, though, I think he's basically cherry picking things from the Western, which is fine if this definition was the Western tradition and what similarities it shares. I think that's pretty accurate. But that is the second one. And again, one of the things I was doing with this talk was trying to apply this stuff to Masonry and if this met his definition of esoteric. Now, as far as the first one with correspondences, you can see in Masonic ritual there, you can point out where we say there's correspondences between things. As far as a living nature, I think that would be a lot more difficult to point to anything in Blue Lodge ritual that explicitly taught something like Ficino was teaching, or that the cosmos is alive and that there's these sympathies between different things. So again, going off of his definition, I don't think that one would apply to Blue Lodge Masonry.
Maybe not Blue Lodge Masonry, but potentially Scottish Rite Masonry.
Oh yeah, again, if we're going to Scottish Rite, there's a lot of things in there that you can pull that would support this. But from Blue Lodge ritual, from York Rite stuff, yeah, I mean, what do you think, Chris? Unless you're really reading between the lines on some stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I may be generalizing way too much or jumping the gun, like you said, but everything that I read, all of his uh, correspondences between these different traditions and everything, it almost everything that he was saying had to do with inner work, transformation, and all of that. And it seemed like every tradition, one of the main correspondences or the main similarities was that inner transformation, that working on your inner self, which
Yes.
which Blue Lodge Masonry seems to kind of forget at times, right?
No, but I'm jumping the gun a lot in this too, but I like where you're going with that because like all of the stuff he's saying so far is basically tools for something else. Like the correspondences, the issues with living nature, those are things that basically make possible these other things I think are more fundamental. Like when you look at some of these look like the clothing he's describing and not really describing what the actual thing is, right? Uh, but again, I'll talk more about that when we're done with this part. The
Well,
third,
I want to go back to this Scottish Rite idea of God being revealed through nature. It seems to correspond well with the nature philosophy that he talks about later in the book. And when you're talking about the universe as a living organism and how everything kind of is connected, um, I can see the correlation between those. And that's why I said earlier that it would fit with Scottish Rite Freemasonry.
But even with that, the Blue Lodge Masonry, they're I don't want to use, well, I guess I use the word, they're afraid to go there. There's not enough people who are interested in taking that step, and so they don't go there.
The next one is the role of mediations and the imagination, which again to me is more of a how this is done, as much as like a fundamental feature. But again, what he draws on heavily to me reading his book is you have Neoplatonic magic like Iamblichus. I think he really drew a lot from the De Mysteriis. So what he said, what Iamblichus wrote is the rational mind is not enough to reach the divine. He's the first one to kind of write about this stuff, that you need symbols, rituals, prayers, images, statues, incense, sounds. All of those things are mediators, and they work because the cosmos is sympathetically linked at all levels and with the human as well. So the imagination is a bridge between the sense and the intellect. So it's basically a mode of perception. It's like a different type of perception that you can have. Through your imagination, you can see like how all this stuff links up, and you can affect other things through this ritual and through these mediators. And again, you have Pseudo Dionysius, basically said the same thing. You ascend through the symbolic participation. Again, we go back to Renaissance Hermeticism with Ficino and Pico, that they're the ones that kind of fine-tuned all of this, that the imagination is the inner eye. It perceives celestial influences. Talismans work because the imagination participates in the world spirit. So, magic is the art of creating these mediating images that work on everything else because these links between them. So yeah, Pico said the imagination is what allows the magician to align with these other objects. And Agrippa, in his 3 books of occult philosophy, writes a lot about this. So again, to me, he's looking at the same things, and I think he's correct that even today, like if you look at these occult groups today, or esoteric groups, because I know occult is still a loaded word, even though I don't think it should be. But if you look at any esoteric group that exists today, using imagination in the proper way is fundamental to a lot of these groups. It's what allows this stuff to happen. So, but again, this is how you do it, not like what these things are trying to do. As you pointed out, Chris, all the stuff we've talked about right now are more, it's kind of, we hit on some metaphysics, like, what is the universe? How does it work? We're talking about imagination, how you get that stuff to affect you and how you use it. But we still haven't talked about it. He hasn't even gotten to the point of it yet. Like, he hasn't hit what all of this is for. And so then he gets to 4, which is the experience of transmutation, which is what you were talking about. And it's the idea that esotericism is fundamentally concerned with inner transformation, which is a metamorphosis of the soul or your consciousness or being. And it's not learning, it's not merely belief, it's not doctrine, it's actual change and alchemy and rebirth and reintegration. And again, this is from all these same things. Like in Hermeticism, the point was to become divine. Like you're supposed to use all this stuff to change yourself. In alchemy, I mean, that is the whole point of alchemy. If you're not talking about operative alchemy, if you're talking about speculative alchemy, the whole point is to totally change yourself. Neoplatonism had the exact same thing. You were supposed to return to the one. You had purification, you had ascent, and then you had transformation. And Christian mysticism, again, the same thing, union of the soul with God, purification, illumination, union, unmasking the self so God can remake it. Pseudo Dionysius maps out this process. This whole thing has this mystical ladder. And again, that's one of the symbols in Blue Lodge Masonry as well. And all of that poured straight into Rosicrucian thought. Rosicrucian emphasizes inner enlightenment, reform of the whole person, regeneration. And then you have like Swedenborg, Jakob Böhme, San Martin, the Christian Theosophers. All of those, spiritual knowledge was basically a rebirth. Like it was a fundamental transformation. And again, Kabbalah as well. Like the list goes on and on with this stuff. So again, I think that to me, some kind of change in the person going through the process is a fundamental tenet of this. But again, that can be a fundamental tenet of a lot of different things. When you look at exoteric religion or mainstream religion, I mean, that's one of the tenets there too. That's supposed to change you as well. So you can't just say that, inner transformation, that's what defines, esotericism, because many different religious beliefs share that goal as well, which is interesting.
Especially Eastern religious thought.
Yes.
I'm not so sure that Western religious thought, as it has evolved, especially in America, focuses on individual change as much as it does individual forgiveness for being the way that you are.
Concordance and transmission. So what he says is that esoteric knowledge is passed down through initiation, lineage, or teacher-student chains rather than discovered independently. And basically that you have to confer this on somebody. Let's see, it's mouth to ear, reserved only for initiates, and there's an exoteric aspect that was practiced by the masses. And again, if you go through the same stuff that we've been going through, you can see it. In Hermeticism, truth is revealed and transmitted. It was passed down from ancient priests. It was passed down from mouth to ear. Neoplatonism, philosophy requires initiation. And that's what they said. Iamblichus and Proclus, you had to be initiated to fully understand this stuff. It had to be received. Kabbalah literally means that which is received. It was a tradition that was passed down from mouth to ear. The Gnostic and early Christian groups, they had secret teachings of Christ that were not given to the masses, that were passed down from mouth to ear. Medieval Christian mysticism and Theosophy, again, all their insights, they perceived them as a chain of previous masters or divine illumination that continued lineage-like through time. Again, the Martinist tradition, which you're familiar with, it explicitly regards itself as a chain of reintegration handed down from these past, like you had these past masters and the secret chiefs that still work with people today. The whole idea of the egregore, like these people are still there passing this stuff down. Rosicrucianism is the exact same. You can see this in Freemasonry. This is an easy one to apply to Freemasonry because, it's pretty much explicitly stated. The last one, though, is concordance. And let me get to that. It's a drive to unify diverse wisdom traditions. And what he says that any esoteric system seeks to harmonize multiple traditions into a single overarching synthesis. So they don't pick one truth, or it's not pick one truth and reject everyone else, but they have to reconcile all these different things into one system. And again, you can see that because he loves Renaissance Hermeticism, and that's exactly what happened there. You smashed everything together. I mean, those guys there were mixing up Plato, Aristotle, Christianity, Kabbalah, Hermeticism, Pythagoreanism, Orphic stuff, like all that stuff was smashed together. And that's what happened basically for Hermeticism to begin with. Like in the Hellenistic period, all of that stuff was smashed together to give us Neoplatonism and Hermeticism. And then we keep doing it now. I do agree that most of these esoteric traditions, they don't reject other systems. They find similarities in them and pull what they want from them into their own and kind of recreate them in a different way. So, but I don't think that's a necessary, that's the thing. You can see that happen, but I wouldn't say that's a necessary prerequisite of being esoteric, because again, I don't know, like I can see an esoteric group that follows all the other definitions, but yet doesn't want to mix their stuff with anything else, that are very dogmatic about it. And I have seen, even though we have mixed that stuff and it's responsible for a lot of the groups today, I think you'd agree that a lot of the esoteric groups today are very dogmatic and do not like to draw from other groups and do not like to synthesize. And that could be, just because these groups have devolved into maybe sometimes cults of personality, or sometimes over here I don't know, but I just don't see a lot of that going on right now in these groups.
Yeah, even within Freemasonry, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Exactly. But I can see where it comes from, because all the stuff is a bunch of stuff smashed together. So again, those are his definitions. All of those things together, and again, because we took a while with that, but it's correspondences, living nature, the role of mediations and imagination, transmutation, and concordance and transmission. That, to Antoine, is what all esoteric groups share, more or less. And like some might favor some of them and drop the others, but they will all have that kind of, all of those things will be present in one degree or another in them. And again, what I want to talk about now is I think that's pretty solid if you're looking at the Western tradition and like looking at these different groups and picking them and saying, we're going to look at these things. But it's not, it's looking at the clothing. It's not looking at the underlying idea that makes all of these things the same. And what do you think? This is a question for you, Brad and Chris. When you look at the esoteric religions or tradition and compare that to exoteric, or I would say traditional established religions, what would you say the main difference between the two is?
Well, if we're looking at Western religious thought, which is predominantly Christianity and Judaism, you have to have you don't have a direct conduit to the divine. You can't get there without a priest or a pastor or a rabbi to explain things to you. Whereas in esoteric thought, the whole idea was to find a way to achieve that on your own. Now, granted, there are the ascended masters and the hidden teachers, but ultimately it's a journey of self-discovery more than anything. And we don't need an intermediary in most of the esoteric belief systems.
I think,
for me, it's a, and I'm probably going to get trouble saying this, but it's the difference between following a strict dogma path as opposed to a path of freedom of thought, freedom of expression and everything, and where you're allowed to intuitively travel that path without getting pulled back into a certain set of guidelines.
Yeah, it's almost like in the Orthodox approach, everybody kind of starts on the same starting line, whereas in the mystery traditions and the esoteric thought, everybody is different, and everybody's approach is going to be different because everybody's result is going to be different.
Everybody's travel is going to be different, and everybody's progress is going to be different because of it.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head here, because again, what Faivre is doing is, to me, he's telling us what esotericism looks like at a specific historical moment. Like he's going back and saying, this is what Hermeticism looks like, and this is what this looks like, and this is what this looks like, which is fine. But I think the core, maybe one of the problems he had is, Brad, the definition that you gave that I want to get into, it can kind of slide close to just being a definition of mysticism. And I think maybe Antoine did not want to conflate esotericism with mysticism, but I think that's a hard thing to do. I think trying to separate those things is, I don't know if it's really possible. And I think he was trying to. I think he was basically saying, here are certain forms of mysticism that make up the Western tradition, and we call those esoteric. But I agree with you. I think the commonality between all of these systems that is different from what I would call exoteric religions, or at least the Judeo-Christian religions that we're talking about here in the Western tradition, is that esoteric traditions treat ontological experience as real. Like basically, they believe that there is a way beyond the senses to gain knowledge of something. So, if we go back to something like Kant, who would say that, everything that is synthetic, like everything that gives you knowledge of the world, has to be learned empirically, and it has to be a posteriori empirical knowledge. That's what gives you synthetic knowledge. It tells you about the world, and you can only have that through empirical experience, through your senses, right? Um, the Western esoteric tradition says, no, there's another way. You can gain knowledge about the world, or about basically being itself, like what is real, not through the senses, but through some other way of viewing things. And again, is in Kantian language, I guess that would be like a posteriori, non-empirical synthetic knowledge, but like ontological knowledge. It's direct, it's not empirical, it provides illumination, it is mystical apprehensions, like inner transformation. That's why all these people say it's ineffable, because it's not empirical knowledge. It's not something that you can say, oh, I saw X, Y, and Z, and it gives me knowledge of this. It's actually direct apprehension of something real. And to me, that is what the difference is. Because esotericism is not defined by alchemy or Kabbalah, correspondences. Those are basically historical costumes. What is a belief that knowledge can come from this direct experience. I want to call it gnosis. I'm calling it like all these other things because if you call it gnosis, gnosis is a loaded word because Gnosticism itself has its own like metaphysics and its own viewpoint on the world, which I'm not trying to get at. But it's this whole idea that you're getting this knowledge from non-empirical or discursive reasoning. And I think that beats Faivre's system because it's universal. Like all of these traditions we've been talking about treat inner experience as knowledge. That is what you need to transform, basically, is this inner knowledge. It's explanatory. Why do we have correspondences? Because they're shortcuts to this non-discursive insight. Like, why do we have imagination and mediations? Because symbols are tools for inducing this non-discursive ontological experience. Like, why concordance? Because if ontological experience is real, then all these traditions must converge somewhere. Like, if you're actually experiencing this something, that means that something is real. And why transmission? Because this type of knowledge can't be given through texts. It has to be experienced personally. So it's taught through rites, through initiations, through all this stuff, not because it's trying to be kept secret, is because you can't give it through text. Like it has to be personally experienced. So again, all of that stuff, all of Faivre's like things, those are just explaining this one thing to me, like how you get there and how these different traditions got there. And again, I think that's the difference because I don't want to piss anyone off either with this and stuff. But if you look at mainstream Christianity, if you look at the Protestant Reformation, you have this. You compare it to the esoteric current. You have faith versus knowledge. And exoteric Christianity tends to focus exclusively on faith and not actual knowledge. The entire Protestant Revolution is built on the idea that faith is sufficient. Justification by faith alone, not experience, not knowledge, not mystical union, just faith and the promises of the Scripture. And again, Luther himself warned against seeking special revelations or extraordinary experiences because they were the door to deception, and that mystics pursue the devil's illusions, which was an actual quote of his. Calvin, again, all knowledge of God is mediated, indirect. Your job is to believe the testimony, not seek an encounter. Anything that feels like ontological encounter is either your imagination, demonic, or a misunderstanding. Again, Catholicism allows mystics, but it kind of puts them over here. You know what I mean? It says mystical experiences can happen, but they're not normal. They're not required. They're not reliable. They're not doctrinally binding, and they need church approval to be trusted. So if you have a mystical experience, they'll allow it, but you're pushed over here. Again, like Origen is great, but he was condemned by the church afterwards because he was one of the ones who was basically like, yeah, faith is great, but faith has to lead to an experience. And that's what a lot of these esoteric writers say, is they say faith is the doorway that leads you to knowledge, but you can't just rely on faith alone. Faith brings you to this knowledge. Because again, if knowledge was possible, if direct experience was possible, then again, you wouldn't need just faith. You could experience it. Basically, it would be like you have to have faith that you will experience these things. And the reason why, again, Brad, I think you pointed out, because direct knowledge bypasses the institution completely. If God or, if truth is accessible internally by each person through experience, then priests are unnecessary, sacraments are unnecessary, scripture is commentary, not authority, doctrine is negotiable, the church loses monopoly on truth. So again, if you have these things, it's problematic because then you have, just like you see, there is no dogma in the Western esoteric tradition. Anyone that has an experience can pop up and write a book and say, "Behold, look what I have discovered about God," like Böhme, like all those guys.
Or Manny, or the Bogomils, or the Cathars, or any other upstart that.
And again, that's what's interesting to me. And again, I'm going back to my notes here. Um, like some I guess denominations, like when you look at the way they talk about direct experience or like miracles or things like that. I mean, you've heard about spiritual austerity. There are some sects that they say that there's cessationism, that the age of miracles is over. It ended with the apostles. Revelations ended with the scripture. Visions are demonic. God doesn't speak directly. Spiritual gifts have ceased. What they're basically saying is the ontological line is closed. The last call was 2,000 years ago. You missed your chance for a direct experience of God. But
Yeah,
trust us, these guys had it over here. You don't need it.
yeah.
Like, faith alone is good enough for you. And again, I'm not being heretical here. I am not making a judgment call on all this. I'm just kind of pointing this stuff out here, what the difference between the two is. So, but that to me is the big difference between the two. And when you frame it that way, it's the esoteric current again says this direct apprehension or ontological experience is possible for anyone. And then the exoteric says, well, no, like you need to rely on what the church says, what the doctrine says, and have faith, and your faith alone will justify you. You don't need to seek these direct experiences. But the interesting thing is, when you talk a lot, when you talk to Christians today, or at least in the Episcopal Church, people tend to mix those things up. Like if you talk to someone from my church and say, "Well, did you know Protestant, religion says you can't have a direct experience of God?" They'd be like, "That's BS." Like, because I've had experiences of Christ, I've had experiences of God. Like again, I think it's kind of mixed here. Like, there's not a hard line anymore. I mean, we're not following like this cut and dry thing here, but by and large, I think that's what the difference is. Yeah, again, so when you go to that definition, though, if you take away his criteria, like what do you think about that application to Blue Lodge Masonry? If the definition of esoteric is basically just saying that experience is always available is the point, that actually learning this stuff and having some kind of ontological experience is possible, and that's the point. What do you think of that applied to Blue Lodge Masonry?
What are we using the teachings of Freemasonry for? And you and I are using them as kind of a spiritual guide to evolve our understanding of our place in the universe and our relationship with the divine. We're we're trying to use it as a roadmap to get back to the innocence of the soul at birth and do away with all of the material junk that has happened to us throughout our lives so that we can experience a closer relationship with God. I think the vast majority of Masons don't view Freemasonry like that, and that there's nothing wrong with that. It's a big tent, right? Like David
Right.
Hill says, it's a big tent. There's room for everybody. And I think a lot of Masons use it to supplement their religious teachings. I think what they're doing is they're taking the teachings that they receive at their church, synagogue, or mosque and applying Freemasonry's obligations and requirements to achieve what they're being taught in the real world. They're
Yeah,
to love your neighbor as yourself and what that really looks like in the everyday
yeah,
life.
yeah. And this all revolves around the journey of the soul, you know, and it starts in the Blue Lodge, and if you can understand how that fits together, or how that all works, then the rest of it becomes easier as you go along, or more understandable as you go along. At least that's the way I see it.
It's just so hard. This is a question that I just don't think can be conclusively answered, that Masonic scholars have been fighting about for hundreds of years. I mean, like, yeah, we do know that the people who were responsible for rewriting the ritual were interested in, at least certain parts of the Western esoteric tradition. We do know the members of the Royal Society were also involved in Kabbalah clubs and Hermetic, clubs and Rosicrucian clubs.
Alchemy, yeah.
Alchemy, like we know they were into this stuff. We know they understood its symbolism. We know there are symbols in Masonry that are linked to some of these traditions, but also to the exoteric religions as well. There again, one of the issues is one of the things I like about Masonry is that it doesn't have a dogma, apart from the landmarks and apart from our fundamental. You have to be, you have to believe in God. You have to abide by our landmarks. It's not telling you, what to do. It's presenting you with symbols and a story and allegories, and you have to go explore that. And once you start doing that, you get into the history of these symbols, you get into Masonic authors, you get into people that have all sorts of ideas about it. You're going to read about these currents, you're going to be drawn into it, and you can make your own decision. It's just, I mean, back in the 18th century, they were having the same fight. Like, is Masonry esoteric or is it not? Is it just a fraternity? Does it have a purpose? Again, you've read The Meaning of Masonry. It's something that he wrote in the first couple of pages cracks me up. He's like, people going into Masonry usually have no idea what the institution is when they're going in, and they're even more confused when they come out, because they're just like, what is the point? Like, and I think that's a strength of Masonry, that it doesn't say this is the point. It kind of just lets you explore and go where you want to go.
Well, that's kind of the beauty of it, right? I mean, it's there for those who want to explore it, but there's no requirement to do so. And so that's why we're all able to get along as a brotherhood for the most part. I mean, I don't I don't expect all the guys at my lodge to do what I'm doing, and they don't expect me to do what they're doing.
Well,
But I find this stuff fascinating. So
I have another question that popped in my head while I was talking about that. What do you think the purpose of gnosis is? Like, let's just say we assume that this direct ontological experience, or this non-discursive experience, is possible, and that you can have a direct experience of the divine or some kind of being, like the truth of the world. What in your mind would be the point of that? Because do you think you can be a good person without gnosis, or is gnosis required? And if so, why? And what's the point?
I think absolutely you can be a good person without gnosis. Gnosis to me would be confirmation not only of the existence of a supreme divine intellect, but confirmation of a continuation of my existence in some form or fashion after my time on Earth. Right now we're kind of operating on faith alone. And one of the beauties of the ancient mystery schools was, and I don't remember the direct quote, but it was one of the early, I think it was Valentinus, who had said that the beauty of the mystery schools was when they were finished with their initiatic experience, they didn't have to rely on faith anymore. They had had a direct experience of the divine. And
Yeah.
so they were changed forever, not just by becoming good people, but by becoming happy people, because they knew through direct experience that there was a divine being and that there was life after death. They didn't have to rely on faith alone. But that would be the important part of Gnosis for me is that direct experience.
The reason I ask is we brought up Faust.
Uh,
That that kind of put the question in my mind because again, that whole idea, we could talk about this for a long time, but like, why are you seeking gnosis? Is it curiosity? Is it to relieve the anxiety of not knowing? Is it what is the purpose behind it? Because again, I've struggled with that too. Because if it's simply to, I wouldn't say simply, because what you're saying is kind of what I believe too. If it was a thing, and you could experience that and know for sure, it would definitely allow you to live in a way that perhaps you weren't living now, as far as getting rid of some of your ego, some of the fear of death, like some of the hoarding, the jealousy, like all that stuff. It would totally change your perspective on everything if you had that experience.
yeah, it's like these books that we read or these shows that we see on about those people with near-death experiences who come back completely and utterly changed for the better, who have had some sort of experience of the divine and their approach to life, their approach to their family, to their friends, to strangers has completely been altered for the better because of it. And, whether or not it was a real experience or if it was just a chemical reaction in the brain caused by whatever it was that they were going through, the fact of the matter is it changed them. And I would like to be able to have that experience, preferably without having a near-death experience.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting to me because it's kind of like the exact opposite of maybe like existential thought. Like basically staring into the void and deciding you don't need gnosis. You can create your own meaning and be happy with that. Like be like, I don't care if there's like, I'm going to stare into the abyss and I'm going to create my own meaning for myself. And that's what I'll live on. That seems like kind of the other end of the spectrum on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not even sure I could believe in what I created.
No, but I like that answer a lot. Like again, because you look at some of these esoteric groups, and again, when they say gnosis, like if you follow them too explicitly, it's about like gaining some sort of power or gaining like, immortality or learning how to do certain magical acts or influencing, your situation like in one way or the other. And to me, that seems more Faustian than what we're talking, even though, Faust was basically just pure existential curiosity. But yeah, again, I think the idea of gnosis being some sort of affirmation that allows you to shed some of that stuff that's been keeping you back, I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea of utilizing it for personal gain, other than just realizing some sense of comfort, um, is not something I'm interested in. I don't want to manifest $5 million. I don't want to. I don't. If I want to make $5 million, I'll go work my ass off.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't need to utilize uh, mysticism or magic in order to make that happen. That's just that's not something I'm interested in or about. So
I mean, what do you think, Chris? I mean, that's one of the questions that I used to get a lot at the CME classes is what is the actual point of all? If you admit if you just take as axiom that this stuff is real, like what is the ultimate point of it?
Well, I think Brad and I have talked a lot about it, and you've talked. You've been in a lot of those conversations too. Um, it goes back to one of the things that Brad talked about earlier on, and that we discussed a lot. It's about reading yourself and getting yourself back to the innocence and purity that when you started the journey, and knowing yourself. Basically, you know who you are and where you're going, and why you're going there, and just that fact, or that feeling, um, uh, it's basically explodes within you, and you know you're good. You know you're on that path to goodness, and you know you're going in the right direction, and that just it just it's like a big blooming flower or something. It's and you don't get that by faith alone. I mean, you get it by knowledge, and I keep putting the word intuition in there. There's a lot of intuition in this stuff. It's stuff that we already know inside, that we become aware of. It was there all along, and all of a sudden we become aware of it, and it's just I mean, that's what we're all trying to do: transform ourselves and get back to the divine in some way.
Yeah.
Agreed. I guess what I struggle with sometimes on that is that that whole process can become when you're pursuing gnosis or you're pursuing this thing, like in any of these groups, there's whatever they call it, there's an end that you can hit before you die. Like it's not like you have to wait till you're dead to experience this. There is an end. If you do these things, if you learn this information, if you get this done right, you can achieve this while you are alive. And that has a danger of taking someone over, I think, for purely egotistical purposes when they could be actually out there like doing good now. And I think that goes back to my question. You have to have gnosis to be a good person, because it seems like these systems, the danger in them is that it does become a personal quest for something that takes you out of living in the now. Like you're not out there doing what you could be doing now because you are pursuing knowledge that you want to feel better because you want to know, the mystery. And so you're ignoring everything else.
Right. It has to be a true journey, and you can't lie to yourself. Your ego cannot take over and lead you down a path that makes you feel good just for the sake of feeling good. It has to be a true gnosis, a uh, true work, whatever.
Well, it's interesting. It reminds me of one of the Scottish Rite degrees
I know what you're thinking.
with the knight
Yeah.
who's being tested, and one of the tests was to go and live as a hermit and a religious ascetic, and ultimately decides against it because it was purely for selfish reasons to achieve some kind of knowledge of God without actually doing any of the good works while he was here for other people.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying, but I still think it just this lack of a direct experience of the divine naturally holds all of us back. And if we could experience that more directly, then it would free us to do more good work.
And I might know the answer to this question, but I assume both of you believe that that type of experience is possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A quote on page 26. Until about the 2nd century BC, alchemy remained a technique associated with the practice of goldsmithing. With Bolos of Mendes in the 2nd century BC, it took a philosophical turn and sometimes presented itself in a light of revelation as a revealed science. Zosimus of Panopolis, 3rd or 4th century, of whom 28 treatises have been preserved, developed a visionary alchemy, followed in this by Synesius in the 4th century, Olympiodorus in the 6th century, and Stephanus of Alexandria in the 7th century, in whom alchemy is also considered a spiritual exercise. Everything that we've read up to this book has said that spiritual alchemy didn't exist until Jung invented it.
Yep, I know.
That's BS.
It is BS. It's huge BS. Again, they have been using alchemy and chemistry as a manner of speaking to, inner transformation forever. And, there's a big movement in Islam too with that too, with the Islamic alchemists. I mean, it was always hand in hand. Like it was always side by side. And to say that Jung, I mean, Paracelsus would be like he was doing that too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's the one that supposedly traveled into the Middle East and learned from the Islamists.
Elias Acknell's book, the Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, which is a collection of English alchemists, like dating back, 500-600 years, and these are all spiritual alchemists. And again, Jung, that people that say that annoys me because Jung wasn't even talking about it in the same way. He was talking about the symbols of alchemy, like that, our subconscious latches onto this stuff and form like it. It was a different type of alchemy. I mean, it's similar, but Jung was not talking about spiritual alchemy the same way that these guys were. They were using it as a process for a certain purpose. Jung was using it in a different manner when he was writing about alchemy. So again, that's just my take on this.
So what was he doing? He was tapping into the universal subconscious and obtaining.
Yeah, he was basically saying, do I have that book here? Is it back home? But yeah, that the symbols of alchemy, were apt to basically just you would transfer like these ideas onto them, like from the unconscious, which is probably happening too. But I don't think that's how alchemy got started. It got started because they were doing actual alchemy work and chemistry work and looking how matter changed by heat and by water and by burning it and by all this stuff. And I was like, oh, that's a perfect allegory for what's going on like inside. It's not a far jump to get there. Like
Exactly.
Because we don't have any gold to show for it, we need to come up with an allegory that goes with this.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. You're sitting there working on this stuff, and you're seeing it transmute before your eyes, and it's a perfect way to do this. Mm-hmm. He was talking more too about like a lot of the weird symbols in alchemy. He's talking about like the dragons and all the other stuff, like that there was a subconscious element of that. And I'm probably butchering this. I haven't read that book in a long time. I just know that it was what he was doing with it was a bit different than what we talk about when we talk about like speculative alchemy.
At the end of the 1770s, two of the principal personalities of the strict observance, Duke Ferdinand von Brunswick and Prince Karl von Hessen-Kassel, decided to assemble the representatives of European Freemasonry in a great Masonic convention responsible for reflecting on the origin, the nature, the reason for being of this institution. With this in mind, Ferdinand sent out circulars to various personalities. The convention met at Wilhelmsbad in July through August of 1782. There, the myth of Templar affiliation was discarded, and the orientation represented by the rectified Scottish Rite became an object of global acceptance. The convention was an important event of the era because we can see two categories of Masons confronted there. Some were attracted to various forms of esotericism, others instead staunchly adhered to the philosophy of the Enlightenment. I had never heard of this convention before.
That's what I was mentioning when I talked about how this fight of what Masonry is has been going on forever.
Yeah, this is 1782.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to research that. But what I'm interested in hearing you explain to me is what is the difference between being attracted to various forms of esotericism and being staunchly adhered to the philosophy of the Enlightenment?
Well,
Is it science versus mysticism?
yes, it was basically you had people that thought Masonry should be more rational, like ethical, like civic, social, like it didn't have these inner transformation aspects to it. Then you had a group that thought it should be mystical and Christianized and symbolic with inner transformation. Um, Again, I'm one of the points of it was they were trying to figure out if Masonry was esoteric or not, like whether Masonry had really descended from the Templars. There were so many degree systems popping up at the time, like they were trying to figure out which ones were legitimate, like who had authority. If I recall correctly, God, I hope I do. I think the Templar myth was rejected, and also this is where we get the CBCS, like you were talking about the rectified Scottish Rite. But again, there's people out there that know much more about this conference than I do. If Paul Rana was still alive, he could talk to you about it forever
Yeah.
because some of the Martinists were there. There was a current that came out of this too with the CBCS. Um, Again, but out of it, two camps kind of emerged. It's kind of the same two camps that they've always been kind of button heads, which is Masonry as a mystic order, esoteric order, and Masonry as basically a repository of Enlightenment values. But it can be both at the same time, which we've
Right?
discussed. But again, that's in my speech because it's so funny that exact thing that we're still talking about. There was a giant rowdy conference that was discussing the same thing back in the 18th century. Masonic history is changing pretty rapidly because now that now that we have academic chairs that are actually studying the Western esoteric tradition and we have documents being translated by tons of people, like what we thought we knew is changing pretty rapidly. I mean, it's very interesting to see like every year, like our viewpoints on what where Masonry came from, like what's going on with it, it tends to change, which is pretty cool to me. It's hard to keep up with though.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun though.
It is.
Okay, it says the rise of scienticism, the claim that science is the only means of knowledge and that there is no other reality than that based on ordinary perception, was eroding faith in spiritual matters. Facing it was the occult current, an extension of what had begun to be known shortly before as the occult sciences. This current appeared as an alternative solution, or rather, as a new response from modernity confronted with itself, more than as a response to modernity proper. In fact, the occultists were not opposed to modernity and did not consider scientific progress as noxious. They sought instead to integrate them into a global vision capable of bringing out the vacuity of materialism.
Basically, religion and science do not butt heads. This is my opinion because they don't do the same thing.
Right.
Like people that try to take science and make it ontological or like metaphysical, you can't do that. Like it just, I don't want to get off into the weeds too much with it, but again, like this goes back to to Kant and Schopenhauer. I mean, when you look at science, science is a form of judgment. You know what I mean? Like it looks at empirical observations, can tell you whether your judgment is good or bad. Like, can you repeat this? Like, is this something that if you say X is Y, is that a valid judgment? Science is a good way of proving empirical observations and what you draw from that. But as far as actually explaining anything, I mean, science can't tell you what is real. Science can't tell you like what we know or how we know it. Science can't tell you like how to behave or how to act towards somebody. It's not ethics. It's not real. It's not any type of reactionary system. It's definitely not metaphysical unless you get into some wacky, like theoretical physics. But again, I wouldn't say it's metaphysical. It's describing empirical like sensations. Um, it's not it's not epistemology. Um, Again, people that take science and put it over and that stuff, it doesn't belong there. And again, what mystics are doing or esotericists is not a form of judgment. Like what they're doing is saying you can have this ontological experience that bypasses that type of judgment completely. So you can't disprove it or prove it with that because it's a completely different beast. And to me, you can see this kind of like trifecta of things, like the metaphysical here, like the ethics and like psychological one here. So you have the objective, the personal, and then the judgment part of that, where you have like science and you have law and you have logic and you have mathematics over here. And you can see when a society leans too hard philosophically on one of those prongs, you have a reaction in the opposite direction later on. Because if you go too far on the judgment side, you're losing basically the personal side, and you're losing the objective side that people want to know these things. So when you have too much science, you have an explosion back on the mystic side. Like when you have too much on that side, you're going to have an explosion back over here. Like that tends to happen like over and over again if you look at history.
The pendulum swings.
Yes, the pendulum swings. The whole point of this, again, the reason I picked this book is because I think people ask this question all the time, and they use that word all the time, and we're all talking past each other with the use of that word. And I know that we kind of rambled on a lot of different things today, but hopefully my goal was to at least get people some more information on, what esoteric means and what the academics think it means, and open the conversation on that a little bit, and hopefully that helped. Again, my opinion, my opinion. I think Masonry is a lot of things. It has an esoteric current through it that you can follow out of it, but I just, I can't say it is, but that's just my personal opinion. And again, having not seen many of your other shows, hopefully this one is not crazy out here compared to the other ones.
Oh, it's crazy.
I was trying to be helpful. Like I wanted this to actually be practical and helpful with some questions that I've heard quite a bit, and these discussions pop up all the time on masonry. But the reason why I picked it too is that every other writer that deals with this topic, like go back to his definition. Like it's become very influential in the field.
Well, like you said, I mean, he was the one that helped to make the field what it is today. I mean, we didn't have chairs of academic study for this topic, which strikes me as a little bit bizarre because this was not written that long ago.
I know. I know.
And the fact that there was so much information and such an obvious current that goes back thousands of years. I mean, why wouldn't they study it? Why wasn't it a topic of study? I mean, Greek mythology is a topic of study. The religions of ancient Egypt is a topic of study, Egyptology, but not esotericism.
Yeah, I know. Again, I don't know why, other than people just relegated it to the trash can. They're like, this is not serious stuff. This is all woo-woo stuff. But really, when you look at it from an academic perspective, it is the repository of so much Western thought. I mean, it's basically what, Platonism was dumped into, like Hellenistic thought, like all of these offshoots, like look at some of the first church writers. Like again, I mentioned Origen, like these people that were writing against the Gnostic heresies, right? Like everything we have before the Dead Sea Scrolls, we got from these guys that were writing, trying to stamp out Gnosticism, right? Or the Nag Hammadi Library. You have people like Origen who weren't trying to stamp it out because they liked the Gnostic thought. They were trying to harmonize this Gnostic thought with Christianity. And for a while, like, until he was condemned later, like after his death, but that stuff was very influential. Like it took Gnosticism and fused it with Christianity and carried it down like Dionysius the Areopagite, Pseudo Dionysius. All that stuff had huge, that is Christian repository, like Christian theology that we discarded but got put in this current and added to all this other stuff. Like it really is, like for our heritage, like living in the West, I don't know why, even if you didn't believe in this stuff, I don't know why you wouldn't want to study it because it is fascinating and it contains a lot of our heritage there.
Yeah, exactly. It's our history.
All in all, I honestly, I'm glad I read it. It was hard for me to read, but I'm glad I read it because I got some stuff out of it. And of course, having some of that backed up by our discussion today, I think it was worth it. Are we gonna give marbles now?
You mean balls, black balls and white balls?
Right.
No, I will just say that as a reference book for identifying other authors and writings to go and explore, this is a good book to have in your shelf. You know, I mean, just the bibliography in the back gives great direction for different writings to go and explore. All right. Well, I guess we should wrap this up.
Yeah, because Jason's probably watching with with his sound off, thinking, "How in the hell am I gonna?"
Yeah, I need to go home. He's at the lodge, and I want to go home. All right. So that's going to wrap up this episode of the Masonic Shelf. Robert, we really appreciate you being here, and thanks for bringing us this book. Until next time, brethren, keep reading.